Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Applications of Psychological Type, first series of webinars featuring Dr. Carol Pearson. I'm just very pleased to introduce Dr. Keston Blandon. She is the Director of Research here at the Center for Applications of Psychological Type. She's one of the principal movers and shakers in the new version of the Pearson-Marr Archetype Indicator, and that's the new version of the assessment that we're going to be talking about quite a bit today. And I'm going to let Keston take over the webinar, and she will introduce our expert guest today. Hello, Keston.
Hi, everyone. Welcome today. As Rob said, my name is Keston, and I'm your host today. This is the first of two webinars that we're doing in celebration of our launch of the Storywell site, which is the new home of the revised PMAI assessment, which we're very excited about to be sharing with you. It has new reports with it, and I hope you visit the website if you haven't. A lot of additional content is there as well. We're also going to be sharing with you today the new icons for the archetypes, so that's exciting as well. As I said, this is the first of two webinars. Next week, on this day and at this time, we're doing the second one where registrants of today's webinar will get a discount on the reports, and Carol will come back next week and we'll be talking about how to unpack those results, how to understand the reports and your archetype profile. But today we are talking with Carol about the 12 archetypes of the revised PMAI. A few are new, some new names there. The stories they tell, and how to recognize those stories in our lives and in our world. We are hoping, as Rob said, that you'll have questions for us. Put them into the question box. It will help me, if you can, if you know you're asking about a specific archetype, to put that in first and then ask your question. If not, just ask your question. I'll try to get to as many as possible. If there are a lot, I'm going to ask a question that represents a grouping of questions. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Carol Pearson. She is the co-author of the Pearson-Marr Archetype Indicator. She's an internationally recognized scholar, well-known author of numerous books, among them the best-selling The Hero Within, as well as Awakening the Heroes Within, The Hero and the Outlaw, and Magic at Work. She's also the author of her newest book, Persephone Rising, Awakening the Heroine Within, which was named a gold medalist in the category of books for women by the Nautilus Book Awards, an annual accolade of books in the genre of social and environmental justice. So Carol, welcome, and I think you have some stories to tell us.
Thank you, Keston, and welcome everybody. I am so glad to be with you. I'll be running through the 12 archetypes on the new PMAI fairly quickly, and I'm going to do it with a focus on our times, which happen to be complicated with a pandemic and economic issues, and you and I trying to make the best of our lives and contribute to the world. All of these archetypes are what Jung called archetypes, which means they're universal stories, and available to all of us, although not all at the same time. So you might be looking at which ones of these call to you now. And I'll also be saying something about how that archetype shows up in perhaps your life or somebody's, and then also just saying how it's showing up in positive form in stories that are being told right now about the world in which we're living and how we're dealing with it. So let's start with the idealist. The idealist in any of us is positive, trust the world, trust themselves, and likes to experience being grateful and appreciative of life the way it is, true to one's own principles and values as well. And I was thinking the other day I walked outside, and I'm sheltering in place, and I took a walk in with my husband, and which we've been doing, looked up at the sky and saw, it's never this blue. Oh, and then I discovered that the skies are clearing up all over the world. And I thought, isn't that wonderful? Our environment is having a chance to heal. And then I thought about how wonderful it was if we're going to be in a situation with a pandemic, how many people there are who are helping us to know what to do. And I then feel confident of to wear my mask and do all the things that you're probably doing as well. Moving on to the realist. By the way, these archetypes can be seen in sequence as actually commenting on one another, even though individually we're looking at 3 or 4 that might be dominant in us at a particular time. While the idealist wants to look at everything in a positive way, the realist is your basic, come on, let's face the facts the way they are. And also tends to value particularly what are considered ordinary people, and having a sense of the importance of, say, a lot of the people are being considered essential workers right now, in a time when there's been a whole bunch of, a lot of focus on admiring people who are rich and celebrities, all of which is fine. But recognizing that our survival often depends on many people who don't often get enough gratitude. So that today stories are being told about, hey, let's look at that. Let's pay attention to the people we count on the most, and what the difference between this pandemic, the experience of this pandemic, if you're fairly wealthy, or comfortable, and if that's not your reality. The next archetype I'd like to look at is the warrior, and the warrior is similar in a way, almost builds from the realist who helps us notice what the problems are. And yeah, we really have to do something about some of this. And it's the warrior that's the go-getter, get out there, and often, I mean, it is a warrior as in war. So how do we deal with whatever the enemy is, whatever the problem is? And an issue for the warrior can often be that we get it wrong. But in this particular case, the stories that I'm seeing that is so very clear is that the battle we are fighting, the battle being fighting, is against the coronavirus, and so the answer is, what tools, what weapons do we use? Well, so for the warrior, it is, can we get it together to get a vaccine? Can we get testing? Can we all do what we need to do to stay healthy until that happens? The caregiver, caregiver archetype is logically next. You know, if you think historically about the functions, even that historically have been necessary for survival, they needed to be the warriors to protect against, you know, wild animals to begin with, and sometimes other people, and fighting over land and various things like that. But there's also data that suggests that the reason that humans were the kind of the species of similar species that survived when others didn't, for example, the Neanderthals. And the other thought that has been found is, or information that's been found is that we as humans took care of each other when they were sick or elderly, and so we had more wise people. We had people who felt cared about, and that helped us survive. Well, right now, I got this really beautiful message that said that we should all just stop and pay attention, that there's a worldwide virtual consensus, not complete, not everybody agrees, but most people have decided that they're willing to sacrifice a good bit for the greater good, for other people. And that what we're doing right now in terms of wearing masks or staying home or whatever, all the things that we're supposed to do, shows that in what I was seeing, was saying that it suggests that we are beginning to get what the great religions of the world have always taught, that we must love one another. And if we do, we can have a much better world. And that went on to say, a lovely story of maybe at the end of this time together, we can create a world that's more caring about one another. Now, let's move on to Seeker. The Seeker archetype is every one of the ones I've been talking about before is incredibly important for the collective. The Seeker begins to be a little bit more concerned about ourselves, and the Seeker, you could start out historically of people migrating to better territories. Today, refugees going to find, or you or me, when we decide to get going and move, to go to a place that we can thrive better. And that can be a better job, could be better friends, could be a substitute family, any number of things. And in this process about going to where we can thrive, it is ultimately about identity, getting a chance to find out who we are. And the key thing here collectively is what do we have to contribute to the time in which we're in, and what is needed, and also what will bring us joy because it is being really true to ourselves. And that's a key idea in the PMAI, because any of these archetypes can be dominant at a particular time, but the key thing is that they are a way for us to balance out being really true to ourselves and thus happy, and making a contribution we can make to the world. And it's an interesting time right now because a lot of us are sheltering in place, and we have more time to be thinking about, well, who am I? And what can I contribute? And it's very important. And then there are people who are working flat out to save others. But they're also seeking in a way of seeing, very often finding new capacities in themselves, or, I didn't know that I could work this hard. I don't know that I could be this generous, etc. So let's move on to Lover. The Lover as an archetype is also about identity, because as the seeker, when I'm seeking or anybody's seeking, we're very much into our individuality and what we like, what we don't like, and connecting with that and moving on. And the Lover finds identity by saying, oh, I'll commit to that person. I will commit to that work. I will commit to that spiritual path. Whatever it is, there's a commitment that is deep, And the lover also likes to bond and connect with people. A fascinating thing I think that's happening right now with the pandemic is how when people are, we're at home, what happens is in a time, and at least many of our lives, and it's often been true of me, is I'm so busy all the time. I don't have too much time for my friends. And suddenly, even when we're pretty busy, it's like we really miss them, really need to be with them, family. And people are on Skype and Zoom and various platforms connecting with people, and it's helping us remember what's really important in our lives in terms of really nurturing our relationships, being close to people, talking with people, and sharing what we're experiencing in this troubling time and being supportive of them. Which leads us right on to creator. Creator is related to identity too, because in the way that we often find out who we are by what we have created. There's a Virginia Woolf novel that ends with an artist who has painted a picture and she knows nobody else will be interested in it. It's going in a closet, but she said, I had my vision. And we can all see ourselves in what we've created, and that can be a cake, and that can be a dress, and that can be, and that can be woodworking. It could be anything, but it's also the lives we're creating, and that comes from a process of imagining or opening up to inspiration, doing something new, creating something new, and crafting it well. And I am hearing from a lot of people that I'm interacting with about, one, they're doing more creative things, they have a little time, and so they're doing things that they love. But also, we've lost the old normal. Our routines are broken up, and so we're creating new rituals, new ways of being with one another. New ways of spending our day. And I find, I often travel a lot and I go places all the time. And now the big event is David and I take a walk in the neighborhood and we see our neighbors and we wave at them. And we notice that it's spring and it's really gorgeous, which is also the sense of the connection of both lover and creator to beauty and appreciating beauty. The balance to the creator is the revolutionary. And the revolutionary is, well, you know what a revolutionary is, you know what all these are, but if many of you may have had the experience I've had, is that if you're a fairly creative person, you keep creating new things and having new ideas until you're overwhelmed and exhausted. And it's the revolutionary that clears out. Basically, it could clear the basement, or it could clear out all the projects that aren't so important to focus on what does need to be created. It's also a critical mindset of what do we not need to do, what could go, and we see that in when so much is kind of unraveling at this time. There is also that question of what of those things can we let go of, and what do we need to hold fast to? And of course, the revolutionary is also a little rebellious. So those of us who are really, really ignored, really angry that we can't do everything we want right now, we can say, "Oh yeah, that's my rebel showing up." Moving on to ruler. The ruler archetype is about taking charge of your life, or taking charge of an office, or taking charge of a project in your neighborhood, or that needs to be done, or your family, or And the ability of the ruler is to get things organized. And, you know, the people are, we're herd animals. We can't really survive without each other, although we forget that in the contemporary time. And the lover archetype, it helps us bond with one another, but it's the ruler that helps us organize our activities, whether it's getting dinner together for a bunch of people or getting the government to work. And it is not necessarily a transformational archetype. It tends to be more really good at maintaining and sustaining. On the other hand, in our times right now, when so much is changing, it is a nice balance, because with the creator and the revolutionary changing, our lives are being changed. It's the ruler that can, in us, that can reconfigure it so that things are organized, things get done. And you'll notice that at this particular time in history, a lot of it is not being done by the federal government, for example, and the ruler tasks are going down to the states and to the municipalities, but also to you and me. I mean, I'm finding in our neighborhood there are problems and people just go fix them. And that's a wonderful strength of the ruler archetype. A major problem with the ruler archetype is fixed with the jester, who is next. Yes, who is next? Okay. The ruler and the jester and the sage and the magician, they're the last of the four archetypes I'm talking about here, are the figures that were in the medieval court. And one of the issues with the with ruler in any of us, it's in the archetype, is a tendency to get a little inflated and think we're above other people and maybe could do no wrong and we're always right and whatever. And the jester's job was to punch, you know, to punch a hole in that inflated balloon. And that's why they had them in the court. And one of the things that you can notice today in the collective world is in our country, we can make fun of our leaders. We can make fun of each other. We can make fun of ourselves and the silly things that we do if we're sheltered in place in a lockdown. And so one of the things I appreciate in that archetype is I've been sometimes gotten kind of blue about everything that's going on, and particularly around, well, I'm reasonably comfortable what's happening to a lot of other people. And then somebody sends me something really funny, and I feel recreated, basically. I'm back with a sense of perspective in the world, and knowing that as long as we can laugh and find ways to still enjoy our life, even when it's not perhaps in the ways that we would prefer, that life's going to be just fine. So our capacity to do that is helps me to have faith that we will get through all of this just fine. Moving right on to Sage. The other thing that helps me have confidence that we will get through this is Fauci, who's the Sage in the public mind right now. The Sage in all of us is the part that really is curious, wants to learn, is willing to keep studying and investigating and thinking and analyzing what's going on in the world. It's people who are, it could be an investigative reporter, it could be a detective, but a lot of times right now we're seeing scientists as our helpers at this particular time and educating us about what they're learning. The Sage is incredibly important to our society right this minute. When you look at we have a COVID-19 is new. It's not that it was totally unanticipated, but nevertheless, scientists are still just learning about it and how it manifests and giving us the best information they can in a kind of day-by-day way. And what a lesson this is as the importance of that human quality to think deeply and to inquire and to figure out what's true in the world and to educate one another about the piece of the world that we understand. And I guess let's move on to the last one, magician. The magician is, well, the sage is about truth, the magician is about truth too, but the magician tends to be about truths that are not so visible, and they're not as easily, it's not as easy to have a scientific study of what the truth is, because they're the things that remain invisible. Sometimes something that seemed magical once is now seen as in the sages category of science. A great leadership scholar once was telling me that until recently, group processes, nobody understood group processes except some people intuitively. And but then there's a field that helps us understand that, and it becomes clear to us. The magician has often been in the realm of miracles, of revealing truths, of healing, and transforming, often in the realm of spirituality and religion, but also in the realm of anything that we can't see. And what I'm noticing in terms of the stories being told about the pandemic is that people are analyzing what is going on in attitudes of people, because we can't see what each other are thinking, and trying to come up with a sense of how will this turn out in terms of what each of us decides in terms of how we're going to be, because there's evidence that pandemics can make things end up with people being meaner to one another and more selfish, or that they can bring out our better angels. And the magician is not only one of the archetypes related to kind of tracking that and what is likely, but it's also the pull, or so the energetic of from inside in this time for us to evolve our expression of the archetypes and expressing them in higher and deeper ways, so that our better angels are being expressed in the world. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Kerstin so that I can answer your questions. And
Great.
Yep.
Hi. Thank you, Carol. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a nice journey through all of the archetypes, and we got some really great questions from the audience. There are some that are grouping around specific topics as we might think, and then some that are sort of unique. So folks, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get to all of them, but if there are some that we didn't get to, and they're ones that Carol and I can answer by email, we would be happy to do that. And don't forget that if you're here next week, some of them may get answered next week. So let me start with, there's several questions that are really around, Carol, the change between the previous and the new or revised PMAI, as we might have anticipated. So I thought maybe we could start broadly and just talk about the difference between the previous assessment and the revised assessment with the archetype changes, and why that came about. And then I have a couple of more specific changes on the archetypes that changed themselves. But first, do you want to talk for a moment about the differences between the two assessments and why those changes came about?
Yeah, well, many of the changes are invisible. They were simply about psychometric matters where we could improve the instrument. But the three, but what people see is that three archetypes have different names. And so I'm going to start with, and why did they get changed?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the users, people who use the instrument in big ways, and in a phone call with Rob and me, said, we've got some problems with these names. And originally, this system came from my book, Awakening the Heroes Within, which was the Jungian human development theory that also talked about archetypes, that any of the archetypes could be present at any time. Now, the PMAI picks up on any of the archetypes can be present in you at any time. But because of that, two of the most fundamental archetypes were identified more with the child archetype, and that was the innocent and the orphan. And many people have gotten their biggest learning from feeling that childlike energy inside of themselves, particularly the way that most of us can feel like a motherless child very quickly, even though we might have had perfectly good mothers, but your parents weren't perfect, and sometimes did hurtful things or whatever in life could have hurt us in various ways. And the innocent, also the innocent, because that's the spontaneous inner child, the childlike part of us that just trusts. I mean, we get born in this world and we have to trust everybody, and we have to have hope or to survive, basically. And but the issue that was raised on those two was that people, this is an instrument used primarily with adults, can be used in adolescents as well, but primarily with adults. And while somebody may relate to the idea of feeling orphaned or innocent, it's not a way that they would like to be typed. Now, this is not a type theory, it's an archetype theory, but nevertheless, it's a name they may not want to identify with. And so while the name was changed and that the descriptions have been changed to address more the adult part of that archetype, that the child part is still there and still part of the learning. The other one was that originally the revolutionary was the destroyer. And I have to say, even writing about that was one of the most important parts of my life, realizing that destruction was part of my life all the time. I once went out, a friend of mine who's very wise took me out on a walk in the woods and showed me how there's always as much that's really decomposing as being born. And coming to accept the need to let go of things. We're not supposed to go, kill people and stuff, but letting go of things and clearing out is very important for staying staying alive. I was going to say alive in terms of being vital, but it also means if we've only breathed in and never breathed out, we wouldn't survive. And anyway, so that was a similar situation because the revolutionary feels a bit more different, but in another way it's not, because what it does is the term destroyer was really about an energy in the world, not so much something I would identify as want to be a destroyer. But I can understand that my getting rid of things, challenging things, even wanting to transform something is not a bad thing. the term revolutionary would be a form that a person would express the positive adult side of that energy.
Mhm. Carol, I think that's your last point there is something that we've talked about before and is really important, that is also true for orphan and innocent, that they captured more of the negative or the darker side, which isn't bad. I don't mean that in a bad way. And that the new names and some of the new items on those are balancing it out better, and that there's a positive and negative, and as well as you've talked about before, an extroverted and introverted. That
Right.
revolutionary is more of an extroverted way to recognize this archetype, and destroyer might be describing more of a subjective way. And the same orphan and idealist, orphan inner, idealist outer, and realist, and orphan with realist, sorry, and innocent with idealist. So I think that's important. And as far as the changes, people had a lot of questions about that. The person who asked if you should take it again because you took the previous version, I would encourage you to take it again. Not only are there some new label names for the archetypes, which Carol was just talking about, but there's new reports. And you'll get much more from the new reports than from the previous one. So I would certainly encourage that.
Yeah. Yeah, what I would say about that too is that it depends also when you last took it. Because this is not a type theory like Myers-Briggs. It's not, it can change. Now, over your lifetime, you may find that there's some archetypes that are always there in your, for you. But some may change. And in that sense, it's a growth instrument. And so it can be amazing. And I've found a bunch of people who have told me over time they caught up with themselves. That it's so easy for us to have an idea, well, I'm like these archetypes or whatever, and then we don't notice it. Wow, something new has happened, and it's exciting. And if I go with that, I'll have more aliveness. And so it's particularly important to take it if there's any part of your life where you're thinking, I could use a little bit more zip right now.
Yes, yeah. So another area of questions, Carol, was about how the new names map to your older systems, or your older systems, the systems throughout your books that you've written. And related to that was a question on the reasoning behind the order of archetypes in your presentation, which I know come from some of your models and theories from your thinking that you've published on for years. But maybe you could talk about that a little bit. You were doing the complementary pairs on the
all of that basically comes from Awakening the Heroes Within, which is also where the old names came from. And other books with different, like The Hero and the Outlaw is a book on branding. And so the archetypes are grouped differently. And they're grouped based on Maslow's categories of motivation, because it's a book about motivation as opposed to development.
So we have some.
I said it was innocent with an idealist,
yes,
orphan with realist, and okay.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway from that, because there were several questions on that, the difference between the old and new, is that there are some nuanced differences with those three archetypes, revolutionary, realist, and idealist, but they still fit within the larger system that you've been developing for quite some time through your work, and they're just more nuanced. And I think you might say, and I would agree with you, more whole or more complete.
They're more complete. And the
Yeah.
other part is that all the archetypes have their negative side. I didn't stress that today because it takes more time.
Yes,
But
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
none of them don't have a negative side. And what I love about working with archetypes is when I realized that, I realized, well, the negative sides are usually younger or more primitive or less developed, which
Yeah.
means that when we have the negative side, we have the potential for the positive side. And that's
Yeah.
true of everybody else too.
Yes. And do you think also that the negative side, in as far as the higher archetypes particularly, you and I and Hugh have talked about this, that the high archetypes have a form of the shadow as well, that if they're overused, or if someone's under stress and they're using that story or that character too much, sometimes the more negative attributes can come out.
Right, right. And by higher, you mean not higher in this order, but higher expression.
And higher scoring archetypes in your profile.
Higher scoring archetypes, yeah. And
Yeah.
and the more stress we're under, the more likely it is the negative part's going to take us over at some point. And if we know that, we don't have to get into a lot of trauma about it.
Yes, yes. So that leads to a really interesting question that touches on this, the negative attributes, and what I just mentioned is some of the shadow attributes, but about the different fears that each archetype has. I know in the new version of What Story, I think that some of it may be in the expanded descriptions, in the expanded report, you and Hugh start talking about the specific fears that each of the archetypes have. I wonder if you could go through a few maybe off the top of your head that you can think of.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, the creator, what comes to mind is the creator, no new idea is ever coming. I'm dry. It's all over. You know, the ruler, everything is chaos. I'm losing control. I'm in panic because I can't control all this. It's just awful.
Yes.
The sage, I worked all this time and it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is that, what is true? Is anything true? Can I ever even know? The magician, the dark, and I mean, those are fears.
Yes.
The magician is such a difficult archetype in the sense if it doesn't come from an integrated core, because you know we get your Jim Joneses, the con artists, and all kinds of people that can so that there's a fear of unconsciousness and doing harm because there's so much power in that archetype.
Right.
One of the reasons that in many religions they want to be sure that you're connected to some kind of higher power that's trustworthy. With that, warrior, the warrior can be really ruthless.
Yeah.
You know, just horribly ruthless. The seeker can end up just alone. You know, not you, but I'm all by myself here. And we're in a country with a high suicide rate, some of which is and high opioid rate, which opioids could be that you're in pain, but some of it is the negative side of the seeker. It was all about me, and now I'm all alone. I don't know. Is there one, Kerstin? Is there one that stands out for you at this moment? Oh, Laura.
You mean for our time now? The archetype stand up our time now?
We're thinking.
Yeah. Well, you and I had a conversation a while ago that I found very insightful when we were talking about the archetypes of our time, and we identified revolutionary in as far as the great disruption that's occurring right now, and there's this great disruption of the way we've worked and the way we've socialized and the way we've lived our daily lives, things that we've depended on. And we were talking about at that time that the revolutionary, a part of the gift, although it can be a hard-earned gift of the revolutionary, is that in disruption you find innovation.
Right.
Through
Yeah.
disruption, things breaking down. That is where innovation comes from.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And if you're afraid of the revolutionary, if you're afraid of change, you won't get any. I mean, but the world goes around changing around you, and then you're an acronym. You become an acronym saying, "Get these kids off my lawn." What?
Yeah. It's not an easy archetype to deal with, but like the magician, it deals with power, just in different ways, going against power, and trying to get power to the people, the established power. But and then we also were talking about in that same conversation that another archetype that we identified in today's time was the lover, and the need of the lover for intimate connection and relationships and staying connected to people, and that the lover isn't just about lovers, like people, in that type of relationship, but the lover is really about that being able to be intimate and connected in a very genuine way with people, and that our current situation, particularly the social distancing and being isolated and being afraid, was really calling up the gifts and contribution and value of the lover.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the fear of the lover is, I mean, there are two fears. One of them is I'll be alone. The other fear is that I will be totally taken over by this relationship, and trying to please these other people, and that I'll lose myself. Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't that, well, what you just said right there is a really beautiful demonstration of how the complementary pairs that you developed in your theory and that you went through today in the presentation really have a nuanced reflection of each other, because the complementary pair to lover is seeker, this constant seeking of the identity, of the individuality. And yet there's this fear in lover of being taken over by relationships. So that, they're connected almost by like this umbilical cord, that connects them deep underground.
And a lot of time, whether it's with a close friend, but even more, or your lover, your real lover, often the times that you actually fight with each other are when you have felt the most close, and then the fear of I'm losing myself comes up, and then you fight. But hey, it works. I mean, you fight, you say how you're different from that other person, and then you can get back together again. And let's hope our political parties can do that someday.
Yeah. And where the antidote for too much of an archetype is really its opposite, this complementary. The antidote to being afraid of being taken over by all of these connections and that you're losing your individuality for the lover is to seek your individuality as a seeker. And same for the seeker. The antidote to always abandoning people and therefore being very lonely and isolated in your individuality is to generate and commit to more connections and relationships with people.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I would add to that, I'm just thinking about an old friend of mine, and she was divorced, and she was wanting another relationship, and it just wasn't happening. And there was an evolution that happened that was not predicted, because she thought she needed another guy, and instead he made a list of. She made a list of all the love in her life, and all the people she loved and that loved her, and including children and grandchildren, and all these people. And at the end, she said, "I don't need a guy." Just that, in a sense, not that she couldn't have had one, but that could have been an extra wonderful thing. But that it's sometimes as we evolve in how much we're capable of loving,
Yes.
that it helps us be fine if we don't have a particular form of it. And that's really true of, you know, somebody who has a lot of ruler and is just running everything. Doesn't need to run everything. You run a lot of stuff, can be just fine saying, take it. I'll do what you say. And not have to, you know, just know there was enough. There's enough power.
Yes. Yeah. We're getting to the end, Carol, which is too bad because I suspect everyone like me is really happy to hear you talk this out and laugh about it in these times. And it's offered a lot of insight. I do hope that everyone comes back next week. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all your questions. There were so many good, nuanced questions that we weren't able to get to. I hope that we can get to some next week if you're here. And again, any that I can answer in emails, I will. There are some that I can just answer directly about workshops coming up, training coming up, which we're hoping to be designing and delivering this year. So I want to first thank you, Carol, for coming in today and talking to us and agreeing to come in next week and talk to us more about the actual reports. So
and
next week,
it's fun to dialogue with you some too, also.
Yes, yes, and we had a lot of expressions of appreciations of thanks and appreciation for you on the comments as well in the questions. So I just wanted you to know that people are very appreciative for you taking the time to talk this out with us. Up on the screen here, you should see the registration for next week's webinar and the coupon code there. You'll get a discount on the reports. And so next week, Carol is going to be talking about the reports. You don't need to buy a report to be a part of next week. You'll get more out of it if you do. If you have an older report, you're free to bring that. But we're going to be talking about your archetype profile, getting more into application, and that might answer some of these more nuanced questions that folks asked as well about some of the archetypes. I think that's it today. Thank you, everyone, very much for showing up and registering and coming in. Carol, do you want to just give us a send-off, a goodbye?
Yeah, I would love to do that. I'm hoping you will come back next week and you'll think a little bit in that time about places in yourself that you're wanting to grow, that you're wanting to change, anything you've been unhappy about, you know, like, you know, why am I so blue, you know, or whatever it is. And other than the fact that there's plenty to be blue about in the world today, questions you have, you know, these 12 archetypes are primarily in the PMI by us as individuals so that we can find ourselves and be happier and more fulfilled. But they're also about, it's our success fulfillment, but it's also success and fulfillment more generally of our groups, of our workplaces, of our families, and that our showing up to give our piece, whatever of the archetypes that are dominant for us, is part of a big puzzle. That if we step into place with that piece, it can make a lot of difference. We don't have to do everything. We just have to show up as us, and the archetypes are a way to do that. So if you think about that a little bit between now and next week, then we can talk more about how the instrument will help, the results on the instrument can help you with that process.
Yes, great. Well, thanks again. Thank you, everyone, for coming in today, for registering and coming in, asking your questions. We hope very much to be able to talk with you next week, and take care.